Have a seat, guys. I was having fun. I mean, I'm going to do a shout out to Paul Offit back here. I mean, one, it's great you're here early. Paul, you're the last speaker of the day, I think, with me later. But I was listening to him talk about the room here and the people here, and he said, you know, if I were to have like a holiday party of all my vaccine buddies, they're all here. So we're very happy that you don't have to have that party. You're having it here today. Our job, as Margaret just said, is to help benchmark for a moment where we are in the science and where we're going in the science. And Len, I wanted to just talk to you about, we were having a interesting chat in the back about what, I sometimes sort of always feel this tension because I'm a journalist. I want to know the dark, the depressing, the things that aren't working out. And you said, we're really at a historic moment, an inflection moment, where the excitement in this field is greater than it's been before. So I just want you to take us there for a moment. Why are you such an optimist?
Oh, well, thanks, and good morning, everybody. We're absolutely at a golden age right now in vaccinology. The opportunities that we have to take advantage of the knowledge that we've been gaining through immunology, biology, microbiology, genomics, and to translate it into advances for patient care is just absolutely incredible. I think the boundaries are endless for what we can do now, translating science into access for patients and improving patient health. And we've seen just in the last year, a new vaccine, for example, just a few weeks ago for shingles that has a remarkable opportunity to help prevent disease and its complications in the elderly, populations that have been very difficult to develop effective vaccines for. So I'm incredibly optimistic because our community is really banding together to advance science, and it's just absolutely phenomenal.
What was the game changer that changed the terrain? I mean, let me just presuppose an event. I had the pleasure at another event like this of interviewing one of your colleagues, Rip Ballou, who's been with GSK for a long time. And this guy, I think about 20 years ago, injected himself with malaria and then tried to tried to vaccinate himself and then put his arm in with mosquitoes. Have you done that? Do you do those kind of things?
I haven't put my arm into a box and been bitten by mosquitoes, but what I have done is I've immersed myself around talented people who are interested in understanding what the challenges are and thinking how can we address these challenges to advance patient health. And that's what the whole vaccine community is all about, is people focusing in on what's best for patients, taking the knowledge that we have and working across groups, academia, government, industry, all working together to advance science. And it's just a phenomenal time. And you were asking what's been the game changers. I'd say the game changers are understanding science and then rationally developing vaccines. So we've moved from empiric approaches to vaccine development to rational approaches to vaccine development, developing molecular signatures for which we can test and refine, use new antigens, use new adjuvants, new technologies to build on that signature and advance it into the next stage. And one of the goals in the future is actually to move into clinical development faster and being able to study fewer patients because we understand the signature of what it is that we're looking to address.
Fran, should those people that are thinking about international AIDS vaccines and the challenge that we've seen globally on HIV/AIDS feel the same enthusiasm that Len just shared?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. First of all, with the idea that it's a group of very motivated, committed people banding together.
Right.
That's true. I think it's important for people to realize that. You have people from academia, governments all around the world, industry working together on HIV vaccines. So I think that's key. But the science also, the past decade or so, because HIV is such a challenging virus to make a vaccine for, which we could spend a lot of time talking about, it really has accelerated scientific discovery. And it's taken, people have moved away from more traditional forms of making vaccines and gone on to look for other fields and bring new innovations into the vaccine field. And it's really driven the science forward. So I think also
Can you break that down for me? I mean, what does that actually mean? What I'm trying to do is get the building blocks of what changed. So when you're excited and you're talking about people coming together, what are actually the building blocks that you think were game changers as you tried to put it? Because we don't have a vaccine in your field yet.
Right. Well, I think one thing is understanding the biology of the virus better. So the virology of HIV, and this is true for many other infectious diseases and viruses now that we're trying to develop vaccines for, but really understanding, and one of the keys to understanding that was the drive to find effective treatment for HIV. So that really pushed the field forward in virology. So we understand how the virus replicates. And now what we're trying to do is understand how can we train the body's immune system, and we're using some new techniques to understand how can we train the body's immune system to develop a protective immune response against HIV. That's one thread of the vaccine field, is working towards how can we get a vaccine that's going to give us broadly neutralizing antibody responses that may protect from HIV. In the past, with vaccine development, I wouldn't say it was easier. We know it's always been a long road, but being able to use killed organisms or killed virus or weakened viruses worked as a vaccine. With HIV and some of the other difficult diseases we're dealing with now, that doesn't work. So we need to apply these new scientific approaches.
You know, before I get to Dave, and I understand as the historian who knows so much of this area over a period of history, you just mentioned adjutants, and you mentioned a lot of the advancements that are coming on to sort of help the body regain its immune capacity or its immune system. And so much if you were in the Cancer Forum yesterday that pharma helped support, you had other sessions, immunotherapy or playing around with the immune system, turning things on and off in the system. Do you worry about that at some level you're going to create not just cures and vaccines for certain kinds of things, but I met a guy once who said, look, I'm one of 5,000 people in the world who could really create something really awful for mankind. And I'm just wondering what the downsides are of some of what we're researching. Do you feel a responsibility to think that through as well?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, patient safety is the #1 priority in vaccine development. It's at the top of the list always, and
right.
We never lose focus on this. We always look to the benefit versus the risk,
right.
And that ratio, let's say, and if the ratio favors benefit over risk, then we proceed forward. But we never stop. We're always looking at patient safety before vaccines get into people, when they're in clinical trials, and then of course after. And they're widely used. And we are very fortunate here in the United States that we have the most robust and really fantastic and very effective safety monitoring systems. Real-time safety data coming from the government, coming from industry, and coming from academia. And we utilize this safety network to evaluate what we're doing. But we're always looking at benefit versus harm. And when the benefit outweighs the harm, then we move forward to advance patient health. And with new technologies comes a responsibility. Of course it does. And the responsibility is also to advance patient health. You'd mentioned adjuvants, Steve. Adjuvants are compounds that help to enhance and shape the immune response.
Right.
At GSK, we, over 20 years ago, focused in on adjuvants as a research platform. It takes a long-term view to advance science, particularly in vaccinology. Over 20 years of development. You mentioned the malaria vaccine, over 30 years of development. That vaccine utilizes an adjuvant in its formulation. And we are now seeing that this science is translating into advances in patient health. So it's really exciting, and at the same time, it's a tremendous responsibility to make sure that what we're doing benefits people.
Dave, I know that you're in this, basically helping to bring this DNA response in, and interested in how you see, the arena of progression in vaccine science from a different corner.
So I guess there's a lot that we've been talking about. Maurice Hilleman said all the easy targets have already been taken, and now the ones are more difficult. But I also think the question of safety really is going to be addressed better than we've ever been able to do before with some of the newer approaches than we had the opportunity to do in the past. If you just think about the problem we have with developing a vaccine for the pediatric population, there are more than 3 million children born each year, and as far as I know, there's no possible assay we can do in 3 million children to ensure complete protection with some strategies in every one of those child, because you can't do 3 million animals.
Right.
But there are new technologies that allow us to jump over hurdles that we used to have concerns about with the way we develop them, and these allow us to do things much faster. Nucleic acids, some of the non-replicating vectors, the recombinant protein plus adjuvant that Len talked about, these are all much more, you can have much better understanding with many of them than we ever did before. And they also protect the populations that are emerging today that didn't exist when Maurice was really pioneering his work, which include people on biologics, cancer survivors, immune deficiency disorders, cystic fibrosis, on. And those people can't take live vaccines for the most part. My daughter has Crohn's. She can't take most live vaccines. And these new technologies protect those populations and the newer populations.
And so tell us about your work specifically, what you're bringing in this DNA vaccine. So
what my group is focused on is the area of using snippets of DNA, non-live, non-replicating, they don't grow, and they don't become part of our bodies, they don't integrate, they're temporary. When we had everyone here having breakfast, probably is consuming a gram of DNA, and it's easily disposed of. We're quite used to destroying nucleic acid in the environment, but yet those instructions can then be delivered inside of our cells temporarily, and they instruct the cells to make the vaccine. And so it's customized, it's produced, the person is the factory, not an outside factory, and it solves a lot of other conceptual issues in vaccines. It solves the whole that each vaccine needs its own basically plant or part of the plant, and you can't change over technologies easier. And several of these nucleic acid technologies promise much faster to the clinic. For example, in the Zika outbreak, we developed the first vaccine that went in the clinic and reported on it in New England Journal just a few weeks ago. And that was only 7 months from no vaccine to actually the first opening of the clinic. So those kind of things really can help us in pandemics. And also you can think of a bridge to person-specific medicine.
Let me ask you guys a quick question, and perhaps this politically incorrect question, but what's the business of vaccines? If you have sort of a large incidence event out there, that seems to me a good business, a good investment you can go out and kind of deal with. If you have something like Ebola, I've talked to folks at Merck, talked to folks at GSK, and really that is something where there's huge expectations of the corporate community, of the research community to go out and solve it, but there's not a lot of dollars and money that is naturally just sitting out there to go and help this. And I'm interested, is that a problem? Is there a problem out there for the next pandemic that we don't see coming down the road, that these things happen small, they require a kind of build up to generate attention? So tell me where I'm wrong in that, because we do see in sort of the business of vaccinology and the business of the large scale global firms some drawback, I think, and some concern that perhaps the way in which firms are rewarded is not in line with the need out there as we look at the next emerging pathogens. Len?
How much time do we have? This is a really, really critically important issue because on one level, it speaks to how do we value innovation?
Right.
How do we value the opportunities that science can deliver for patient health? But at the same time, this challenge creates an opportunity. We need to think of new models, new ways of valuing innovation and bringing advances to patient health. And the crises that occurred with Ebola, with the pandemic of 2009, now beginning of Zika, creates the opportunity to think of new models. The standard way of developing vaccines has worked really well, yet it's not a model for the future for rare emerging infections or diseases that impact smaller parts of our population. And we're seeing tailwinds here. We're seeing new developments, new groups, international consortiums getting together to try to tackle this issue. Has it been solved? No. Is it going to get solved? I'm optimistic that it will, because we really recognize as a world community how important it is to address this. So the answer isn't here today, but it's clearly happening. People like Stanley Plotkin and others are really devoted to making the world a better place in the future by creating new models for how we can bring non-traditional, market-oriented vaccines to bear.
Fran, do you have thoughts on this? Because you're very much in this space, and you also deal with the African continent. You've got a lot of global players involved with a huge effort. And I often ask people, what do you not have? I mean, you do have so many resources, and some of these forums tend to be rah-rah. Everything's great, science great, platform. What's missing? What's not great that's inhibiting your ability to achieve the success you want?
Well, I mean, I think HIV is different in that it's not an Ebola outbreak that you mentioned, you know, how can we respond? But actually, a lot of the things that Len said are very applicable, and I don't think we can expect one component of product development like pharma to be responsible for everything.
Right.
So we need the countries where people are most infected to also play a role, and then groups, IAVI is a small group, you know, nonprofit product development partnership trying to fill the gap where there's difficulties for pharma to see a business case. There can be other groups that come in and do a lot of the earlier work and show that there's some benefit of a particular vaccine, and then there can be a larger partnership to take it forward. So I think, if you ask me what's missing in HIV, I think that really it comes down to the science. I mean, I do think that there's enough parties interested in making an HIV vaccine. We have a lot of very good partnerships. We could use a little more support from the countries, the governments of the countries that we're working in terms of financial support, but that's super challenging for these countries, which have so many health issues to deal with. We have political will, but the science is really, really key for HIV, and that's really why it's been such a long road for an HIV vaccine. I'd say that's the main reason.
Dave, what do you think about the economics of this?
The economics.
Yeah.
Well,
or maybe you're in the research there, you don't have to worry about the economics.
No, I think the economics are...
You guys should change jobs for like 2 weeks and see...
That would be good.
So I guess, you know, vaccines are very, very important, but, you know, we have very unusual demands on vaccines. So we mentioned safety. When I say safety, we want vaccines to be safer than water. Because if 3 million, if you go 3 million in the birth cohort, you have more kids having bathing accidents than we expect to get from vaccines. So when I say safety, I want to be clear. That's what I mean. It's not that they're safe, they're extraordinarily safe. And then that, of course, it is expensive to do what Len said and make sure everyone is protected and safely. That's an enormous task. It's a much higher bar than we set for almost anything else. And so that's a big challenge, and that's cost. So that's an issue, and I think that's reflected in some of the consolidation in the industry. We really only have 5 major players. We have smaller players, but we have 5 major players, and therefore, you know, all of us that work then work with some of those, and that you know, can slow things down. It would be improved if we can get newer technologies that have a broader base in the population, have more ways to go, and that would be an important thing. And I think that's sort of a reflection of how difficult vaccines are to make, and to the responsibility of making them safely and getting them out there and so reproducible. It's caused that shrinkage, which I think if we go back to the 80s, there were about 27 larger companies. So that's a real big difference. And I think the newer technologies likely are critically important, because some of that winnowing is because of the reliance on these older, very difficult.
Where are we on the, I guess we call the delivery or the distribution or the shots of vaccines? Is there much innovation going on? I've always sort of felt, I mean, you know, I'm going to put something on the table here about myself. I hate needles, right? So a lot of the world hates needles, but I mean, when you begin looking at it, there's not just innovation in the vaccine, there's innovation in the way we're looking at delivering, but where are we with that? And is that a game changer? When, Dave, you're talking about trying to achieve a safety dimension that is safer than water, clearly there's a marketing challenge out there, right? So one is to get the fact of that out there. The other is to convince the public that it's, and we're going to get to that issue through the day. But where are we in terms of innovation and new possibilities in the delivery of vaccines to a population? Dave?
So I guess that is always dependent on the way we feel about them. I don't think in the Ebola outbreak there was any problem giving people a needle.
Right.
Because
they felt the immediate need.
They felt the need, and I think one of the true reasons we even have that question is because of how wonderfully successful and safe vaccines are. We don't worry about rubella because of Stan. We don't worry about rotavirus here because of Paul. And so we say they don't exist because we don't see them, but we don't see them, and we don't see measles because the vaccines are keeping us from seeing them and keeping us not just, and then there's a whole...
So there's an attitude that's developed of vaccines being optional.
Yeah.
Right? That's what's happened.
Do any of us
yeah.
say we don't want to have, who need a hip replacement, that we don't want to have surgery for that? Mm-hmm. Or if you need a bypass and you're going to have a, does anybody say, oh no, I won't take that, I'd rather, put up with the consequences of the heart attack? I don't think so. So, that's kind of what's happened. We're so successful that even this very small deliveries, we have oral delivered vaccines mm-hmm. as well, but I mean, just to take it to needle is pretty small consequence, actually.
I mean, there are a lot of new technologies being developed, but they're really more about, not so much about user preference, it's more about immunology. So
right.
there are microneedle patches that are
right.
being developed. There's electroporation, which Dave is quite familiar with, to give through the skin. There's oral vaccines, as we mentioned. But I think that has more to do with trying to get a better immune response. And actually, this idea of fear of needles, that's very culturally specific. So it really varies if you go around the country. Many people see vaccines as truly life-saving, which they are. So many of the places where we work, that vaccines are highly admired, mm-hmm. and people, there's a strong desire to get your child vaccinated. I mean, you see the health systems in many African countries are really populated mainly by women and their children, and they know they want to get their children vaccinated. So the needle is not an issue. But, not to discount your fear and everyone else's, other people's fear.
Look, I get them anyway, but it's just not fun. I mean, if you could make it fun.
Yeah, but when it does get really, if you want to speak about fun, I find what's really fun is coming to work and seeing the young bioengineers that work with us, who are looking at bioengineering to deliver the antigen and the vaccine components to the right part of the immune system, to deliver the payload, let's say. And that's the approach that they take. So vaccinology and science, it also includes bioengineers now. So we can make sure that the medicine, the vaccine, gets to the right place at the right time to deliver the right effect. So it's really exciting.
Guys, I talked to one of your colleagues, Luc Debron of GSK, and I don't know his exact title, but he's sort of the head of global research.
The big boss.
Yeah, big boss. So Luc Debron is very interesting, and he said, look, we have a global problem that we have viruses, we have things that are going to come back, and we have incredible capacity to now genetically decode what comes at us and to rather rapidly respond in a much faster way on emerging viruses than we ever had before. But it's not in the economic interest of our firm or other firms to just sort of have that available. And we need 200 doctors from around the world in a place ready and constantly working on this as we see more and more genetic advancements, as we see the ability to kind of construct a response on the genetic front, and we need nations to pay for that and to come in. And he was very, very passionate about saying that the world and humanity needs this facility out there, wherever it may be, and was critical of the United States, that the U.S. has been slow to jump into this and to participate. And I'm wondering if you look at it, I have to tell you, of all the times that I've had similar discussions, I've never seen someone so passionate about the need for an international body of this sort that dealt with this, that brought science and that continued to make science an evenly performing process, not just something that was happening reactively and impulsively as things came along. Where are you in that?
Well, what Luke is getting at, and I know Bruce Gellin is here, Bruce has been focused in on this area, has to have others, is that as a community, we've been extremely wonderful in responding to crises. Mm-hmm. So when Ebola hit, everything stopped in the company, and we pulled all of our resources to developing vaccines for Ebola. Same thing during the H1N1 pandemic of 2009. Zika as well. And starting and stopping is a very disruptive process to any group, be it industry or academia or government. And so what we would like to do, and the world is starting to move in this direction, is have a dedicated group of scientists across all disciplines, manufacturing, regulatory, science, development, who are going to be completely dedicated to developing areas where the scientific community says this is where we need to focus. And so you can't get pulled to, okay, I'm sorry, drop that work, you now need to work here. But rather, you're focused in on these areas that are not going to have the economic yield that traditionally would be there, but it's critically important for public health. And so what Luke is getting at is to have dedicated groups of scientists across all disciplines who can be dedicated to working on emerging infections or areas where the scientific community feels it's important to develop a vaccine, where there may not be the traditional commercial calculation. And then if you have that group of people, they're going to deliver because they're not going to get pulled to some other project.
So before I go to the audience, Dave and Fran, just real quickly on this, you know, my question to Luke, were he here, is does that not already exist in the existing ecosystem of researchers and scientists that are communicating, the conferences that are going on? So is this an illusion that we don't have it? I'm just interested in just real quick for him, do you think that this is a false notion that in fact that the ecosystem of research is pretty good right now? Dave?
I think it's a complex question. I think that what we definitely don't have, if you move a little away from the bench, is we tee a lot of these up. Outbreak happens. The companies get together with the researchers who are focused in that area. They develop something, or in the case of Ebola, both of the vaccines, the first two that went to the clinic were around for almost 15 to 20 years and had not been moved forward. There was a different innovation there, actually. The ring vaccination was very clever in trials, if you could talk about that. And then we put them in place, and then public health measures, which are also critical in these situations, also kick in, and frequently the pandemic starts to get under control, you know, in the presence or before some of the vaccines get deployed, and then there's no interest. There's no interest at that point. And so you wind up with a situation where you have a pharma company that's taken some other products offline, which cost them money, which certainly their shareholders don't like and don't encourage, and then you now have this thing that nobody wants to take forward. So that's really a valley of death for all of these, and I know we'll probably hear about that, but CEPI is going to fund through so-called that and move a couple of products in these different really clear areas we need, so that we will have them ready to go and some stockpiled event, some collection, so that if an outbreak happens, we would have them. That clearly there's a need. So that's a combination of sort of developmental scientists and
thank you. Fran, quick thought?
Well, I mean, what you described is basically what IAVI has been doing
for
IAVI
is one
about
of
20
the models
years.
of this.
Yeah, so for HIV, I mean, there's a gap. We realized there was a need for sort of a quick, efficient,
So you
kind of
are
nimble.
the market response.
Yeah.
The response to the market failure.
Well, yeah, it tries to fill the gap and make a model that will work for other large developers to get involved. But I think that we haven't been as good, definitely, with other diseases, and the recent outbreaks have really highlighted that. And so I think the CEPI organization that David mentioned, Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, is a good response.
Great.
To that.
We've got time for a couple of questions, comments. Yes, right here in the back. We're going to bring you a microphone. And she's going to hold the microphone. I wish I'd give it to you, but
I'm Rui Chow from the Philadelphia College of Pharmacy and Science in the University of Sciences. The question that I have is with regard to the public perception of new vaccine development. Now, I'd like to cite the debunked theory of connection between the MMR and autism. Unfortunately, that was years ago when it was debunked, but even recently, in September, there was a paper published in the Journal of Inorganic Biochemistry.
Right, I'm going to ask you for short form.
Very short. Linking the presence of aluminium with brain lesions that resembles autism. Unfortunately, that paper was found to be fraudulent. Now, how do the people, the panel, can address this in terms of the science, in other words, of the new
Thank you. Perception. So quick form responses on that.
Well, I think we need to look at the science, actually, of vaccine safety, and Len referred to this, and there's an incredible amount of peer-reviewed publications and decades of data on infants that have been vaccinated with a number of vaccines, and adult vaccination data as well, really supports that vaccines are incredibly safe, incredibly safe. And so I think that's a really strong message that we need to give to people we work with in our communities here in the US and around the world, that we need more vaccines and they are safe.
Just as we close, I want to ask Leonard and Dave one final moment, because we were talking in the green room about how the production of vaccines is changing, and we're going, and I use my own language, it sounded like you when you were talking, we're going from giant Budweiser scale beer vats to 3D printing in your living room, that the production is changing and shifting. Is that already happening in your world? Are you beginning to see the capacity to generate responses that is just being shrunk down? Well, so the physical size of production?
Well, I don't think we have any licensed products that way right now, but we have technologies, as Len and I were talking about, nucleic acid technologies that require much simpler and basically could be reduced. It's chemistry to immunology.
Right.
And that is scalable, and the rest of the issues you brought up.
Len, you were very graphic about it.
Well, it's absolutely fascinating to think that in the future, instead of having a factory that's the size of the Kimmel Center, we can have a factory that's the size of the little green room back there. With plug-and-play technologies where you can be switching out the genetic material to make a vaccine against. But where we are is that the science is advanced, but the regulatory process has not kept up.
Right.
So this is hasn't completely gotten to live yet. We need to have the regulatory affairs side and the ability to license a vaccine to catch up with the science here so we can deliver on that promise.
Well, I'm going to end it there. I want to thank Len Friedland with GSK, Francis Priddy with the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative, and David Weiner with Wistar. Thank you all very, very much.